Hello, beautiful people, and Happy New Year. I know it's a little late to the game to wish you a Happy New Year. We're like well into January now, but I have to do my 2023 favorites. Again, a little late. It was a bit of madness in my house over the December period. I got pink eye twice. I am now dealing with like an allergy, an eye allergy. You don't need to know all that. It was a little bit of chaos, and I was not going to film when I was in that state, let me just say. But here we are. I have 10 books to share with you, the best books I read in 2023. I think I read 96 books over the year, which is really great for me. I'm very happy with it. I always aim for like 52 books every year. One book a week seems relatively okay to me and easy to do. So 96, I surpassed that goal by a landslide. So I have 10 books that are my true favorites. I've ordered them and everything. And I have 2 honorable mentions that I'm going to share with you right now. The first is The Last Lifeboat by Hazel Gaynor. I read this kind of on a whim. I read a little blurb about it. It was a new release. I immediately bought it. It came to me. I immediately read it. Now, this is different from me because a lot of the time my books can sit on my shelves, whether they're new or old. They can sit there for a little while. So I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. It is a World War II historical fiction book. It takes place in 1940, and we follow 2 women. One of them is single, lives in Kent. She works at a library, and she simply feels like she's not doing enough for the cause and wants to step up. And so she agrees to be essentially someone who accompanies young children from England to places like Canada, Australia, other places, to ensure their safety over the war, because London is being bombed and the kids must get out. There was a first wave of mass exodus essentially for the kids, many of which went to the countryside. But since then, I think they sent the kids a little bit early, like the bombs didn't drop and they were wondering when that was going to start, but they sent them early. In the case of Lily Nichols, a mother of 2, she sent them off, nothing happened. And so she said, well, come on back. And then the violence began. And so she's in this predicament where she now wants to send her kids away to safety, but the only option now is to send them overseas. So she's decided to do that, and she's decided to send them on the SS Carlisle. And we follow these kids and the person accompanying them, Alice, on this journey. And then we see the SS Carlisle sink. A Nazi U-boat torpedoes this ship. Many people die. It was en route to Canada. But we follow Alice with these children on a lifeboat. They have survived, but there's no one around to help them. And they are worried that they're going to die on this boat, this little lifeboat. I was totally riveted by this, really enjoyed it. Almost made my top 10, but not quite. The other book I wanted to share with you, another honorable mention, is The September House by Carissa Orlando. Excuse me. I think this is her debut, and I want to read everything she writes in the future. This is horror, but if it's possible, this is like cozy horror to me. This follows a woman named Margaret. She and her husband Hal move into this beautiful home. Their daughter has gone away to university, and they're like, you know what? We've always wanted to live kind of in the middle of nowhere in an old, beautiful home. They move in. Everything is great, except for the fact that it's haunted. Now, it's kind of minorly haunted through the year, but it gets horrific in September. In September, the walls bleed with blood, and there are all of these ghosts that make their appearances, and their presence is very well known in this time. There's a little boy who like bites you, and there's actually a quite lovely woman who offers you tea. And we follow Margaret. Hal has left. He just can't take the house anymore. He's decided he wants to leave. And their daughter has never come home to visit. The daughter is like repeatedly trying to contact her father and is getting no answer. So she's worried. And she's like, Mom, I'm coming home, to a home that she's never been to. And she comes home in September. So Margaret is in this predicament of trying to hide the haunted house from her daughter, and also deal with the haunted house in September. And it is truly cozy horror. Like, definitely before you read this, get yourself some tea, because tea is such a lovely addition to this book. I really enjoyed it. Like, it is a bit, it's creepy and there are scary scenes, but it truly is cozy, and some of the ghosts you kind of quite like and would want around. So I really loved The September House. Coming in at number 10 is Maisie Dobbs. This stands for an entire series. It's a very long series. I'm in the middle of it now. I think I'm waiting for number 7, I want to say. So I've started reading this in December, and I just can't not put it on this list because it's been such a joy for me. Maisie Dobbs takes place between World War I, and it does go into World War II. I'm not there yet in my reading, but it follows Maisie, who started her life kind of poor. Her parents were poor. Her mother died when she was quite young, and her father sent her away to learn to become a maid, and she is a maid of this home. But she's also very, very intelligent, wants to learn all sorts of things, and her employers find her one day reading in a library, in their library, and instead of telling her to go back to work, they say, oh, you're interested in reading. We know someone who could teach you, like, in your off time. And so she immerses herself and is taught by this man essentially how to become a detective. And so she, we meet her in that time, and you meet her opening up her own business. She's kind of taking it over from this man, truly. And her, I don't know what you would call him. So someone that she looks up to and has taught her all of this time. So she opens it up, and every book you're following her trying to solve a case. And these cases almost always truly have to do with something that happened in World War I, and some sort of trauma that happened in World War I, or some sort of mystery that happened in World War I. And so it's really quite lovely to learn about history through Maisie Dobbs. I'm absolutely loving the series. The first book, I will say, was not my favorite. But I'm so glad that I continued, because it's just so cozy, and I listened to them on audio, and the audio narrator is really great. So yes, Maisie Dobbs comes in at number 10. Number 9 is Our Wives Under the Sea. Now, I didn't rate this 5 stars, but it stuck with me that it just had to be on the list here. Our Wives Under the Sea follows a couple. One of them is like a biologist, essentially, and she goes into the depths of the ocean with other people, and she's studying plants and things under the sea. And one day she gets stuck there. Nothing is working on this submarine thing, and she can't come up. And she and her co-workers start panicking, but then they also start doing very strange things. So you are following, so you kind of go back and forwards in time. You're following her under the sea, and then you're also following her partner, who is absolutely petrified that she has died. You're following them while So you follow them while she's stuck under, and then you follow them when suddenly, magically, this submarine comes up to the surface. People are rescued, and you follow her when she comes home and she starts to do strange things like submerge herself into bath water for hours and hours on end and speak very strangely to her wife. And it's really quite devastating watching the wife who was waiting for her significant other to come home, and then when she finally does, she finds her completely changed. Now, I don't know if this is supposed to be a book that explores like dementia or something along those lines, where she's physically there, but you can't quite reach her. I don't know if that was what it was, but it felt so uncomfortable and extremely isolating. That was one of the things that it really explored, where this woman can't reach the company who sent her wife into the abyss, essentially. She can't reach them. No one can help her. Like, no doctor could ever understand what her wife was going through. And it just felt so isolating, and you're like on the brink of devastation. So it's a hard one, definitely, but it definitely impacted me. And I really, really liked it in the end. It was really well written, for sure. So it definitely had to be on this list. Another gorgeous book is Small Things Like These. I read this in January of 2023, and it was incredible. It's a little tiny Irish novel about a man he's a family man. He has a wife and daughters. And one day he is bringing wood to a convent. And it's a convent that also takes in unwed mothers with children that they're supposed to adopt out. This is historical fiction, and it takes place in the 1900s somewhere. I don't remember exactly when. But he brings this wood to them and finds a woman who has given birth or is about to give birth, and she is there's something just off about her. Like, she's just in a way that she's like a victimized in the situation. And his own mother was unwed, and he dealt with people looking down on his mom, and he dealt with the judgment, and he finds it within himself to try to make a change. And he kind of takes this woman under his wing, and it's a short novel, but it's so beautiful, and it's such a lovely novel. It takes place at Christmas, and I would highly recommend reading it at Christmas, because you have this strange juxtaposition of Mary, who, has a child, gets pregnant through God, out of wedlock. I mean, she's married to Joseph, but that's not how he came to be. And you have that juxtaposed with these unwed mothers and how Mary is revered, and then these women are just discarded and treated abhorrently. And then we've got a thriller, Reconstructing Amelia by Kimberly McCreight. I did not know what to expect of this. I think I thought it was going to be a very kind of expected thriller, if you know what I mean. You can definitely read thrillers these days where it's just like, I've kind of read this before. This felt so emotional, and I cried reading this. And I've only read 2 thrillers that have ever made me cry, and this was one of them. This is about a mother who discovers that her daughter has jumped to her death. She has jumped to her death, and she does not understand it because there were no signs that Amelia was dealing with anything wrong. There were no signs of anything where she thought she would end her own life. Now, our mother is a very busy mom. She's a single mom, so she's a working mom, and she deals with a lot of guilt afterwards, where she's like, I don't feel like I gave her enough time. Why didn't I see any signs? And so she starts reconstructing Amelia to find out what happened. She does want to give the police time to look into this. They have ruled it as a suicide. She does not believe it could be a suicide. And so she's imploring them to look into it. She's working with a private detective to look into it as well. But she decides she also wants to be invested in it as well and reach out to people and find out what happened. So you follow her reconstructing her daughter, and then you follow her daughter at the time while she was alive, dealing with strange girlish cliques and a best friend who is kind of boy crazy and she's not, and it was just so interesting to see these two, see the mom like understanding her daughter a little bit more through this, and see this kid dealing with high school. And like, honestly, I'm a little bit nervous about high school stuff because it's a different world. Like when I was in high school, the internet was very, very new, extremely new. So I didn't ever have bullying ever follow me home. Home was just a sacred space. Anyway, it's just a little nerve-wracking, and this book will not ease those nerves. It definitely did not, but I just thought it was so emotive. It made me cry. Like, what in the world? Wonderful. Next is a historical fiction mystery book called Homecoming. This is Kate Morton, and it was like, I feel like in the last book that she wrote, she just stepped away from her norm, and it was like she was back reading this book. I was so thrilled. This takes place on Christmas Eve, 1959, in Australia as well. Most of the books, I believe, that Kate Morton has written has taken place in England. She's from Australia, and so it was really nice to feel like she's going home as well. So this follows a mailman, dropping something off at this family's house. He usually goes this route, and he stumbles upon a crime scene of many dead bodies. And we are going backwards in time, trying to find out how this family, an enormous family at that, were killed. It seems like they were just having a picnic, lying out in the sun, but then they suddenly died. What in the world happened? And you're meeting several people in this book from different people's perspectives of what happened that fateful day. So you also flash forwards in time. 60 years later, we follow Jess, who I believe lives in America or something like that. And she's just gotten a call that her grandmother is ill. And she goes back to visit her in Australia. She discovers that her grandmother was, I think, trying to reach something in the attic when she fell and hurt herself. So she goes up to the attic to kind of try to figure out what happened. And she stumbles upon all of these things, like a letter. There's certain things that make her realize that maybe she doesn't know her grandmother, who was like beloved to her. Maybe she doesn't know her very well. And she looks into this mystery in the past because it's tied to her grandmother in some way. And I just really, really enjoyed it. The ending shocked me about, like, you find out, of course, at the end how the family died. And I was completely shocked. Didn't see it coming. I love that when that happens. So wonderful. So Homecoming for sure. Coming in at number 5 is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I love Grady. He can do no wrong. He's my favorite horror author. And this follows a brother and a sister who do not get along. They have not talked to each other in a very long time, but their parents have recently died in a car crash simultaneously, and they need to sell the house. Now, they haven't been in the house for a while. It is the house that they grew up in, but they realize soon after that it is haunted. Their mom was a very strange kind of woman. She liked to create puppets, and she was like part of this whole puppet community. If you're scared of dolls, this is like your horror book if you want to be scared. And they go back into the house and all of these puppets are there, and they're like, what do we do with these puppets? And then the puppets start doing things to them. That's quite terrifying. They have to somehow work together, band together, talk about what's happening, but they're each very reluctant to do that. The first, I'd say, half of the book you read from her perspective, and then the second half you read from the brother's perspective. And I just loved, I love the layered aspect of this. The fact that they have this like super tumultuous relationship added so much to the book, but then dealing with all of these ridiculous dolls that are doing ridiculous things. Like, it truly is a bit funny. And that's one thing that I love about Grady Hendrix, is he weaves humor into his horror books. So you are scared at times, but you're also laughing because it's so, I don't know, it's just so comical. You can feel that he's having fun writing his books. I just love that. It really comes through. Speaking of, I felt the exact same way about The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This is about a woman who is living pretty isolated. She's renting a home, and it's off season, and there are not a lot of people around her. That she has like one neighbor far away, and they, I don't know, they play some sort of game together where they like look through a binocular to each other and like play some sort of game. And then she has a landlord that she talks to, but otherwise she's super isolated, and it's by choice. She's got her dog, her Labrador dog. She wants to be alone. She's dealt with some stuff in the past that she's kind of working through or escaping in this book. And you follow her living her life. She's doing a lot of reading because that is what she does to pass the time. And so she reads this horror book that she's just like completely disgusted by. It is a ridiculous book. It does not show women in the wisest of lights. Like we have in this book, for example, there's this girl who is in high heels running through like the woods or something like that. And she's like, this is just not something that would happen. This is not realistic. So she gives the book a terrible rating, and she writes a terrible review. And she's like, that's that. And then she gets an email from the author who's like, listen, I worked really hard on that book, and I think you should take that review off. And she's like, no, this is how I felt about the book. This is part of the whole process. You write a book, people read it, and they feel things. And he's like, absolutely not. So they actually go head to head to each other for a while, and she refuses in the end to change it. And then strange things start happening around her house, and she starts to get scared. And this has like home invasion stuff in here, but it also has the perspective of the invader in here. And those scenes are hilarious. You really could feel Taylor having just the best time ever writing this. I loved every second. I was chuckling. I was scared because home invasion does scare me. Like, that is one of those words that if I hear that there's a book about home invasion, I'll want to read it. I don't know why I like to torture myself, but I do. And so I loved The Last Word. Next up is The Paying Guests by Sarah Waters. We're in the top 3 now, guys. This is just wild. So this takes place in 1922. It is just after the First World War, and people cannot afford their homes anymore. There was a bit of a change at this time where people who lived very wealthy suddenly are brought down to being a little more humble. And so we meet a daughter and her mother, who live in this huge home. Their entire family has died. I think there's a brother that died, a father that died, and so they cannot afford this house anymore. So what they have decided to do is take in paying guests, which is basically they're renting out, I think, the second floor. They're living on the first floor, they're renting out the second. In a newlywed couple, Lillian and Leonard Barber. And our main character, Frances, doesn't know what to make of them at first, but she ends up becoming quite close to Lillian. And there is some sort of romantic attraction between her and Lillian, and that definitely escalates. I will say there is some like love notes written here and there, and I didn't like those because, as you guys know, I have no heart, so I didn't enjoy that aspect. But smack dab in the middle of the book, we have a death. I will not say who died or how they died, but we have a death smack dab in the middle of the book. And then suddenly it shifts from this like interest, this love affair interest, to what in the world is going to happen now that there's a death. Because it's unclear how this person died, if they died of ill will. I will say it is some sort of murder. I'm not going to say more than that. I don't want to give it away. But that second half of the book, it shifts everything. Everyone's relationships with everyone shifts in the most wonderful of ways. I don't have a lot of Sarah Waters' books left to read that I haven't read. She hasn't written anything in forever. So I'm a bit worried at this point, but I'm so glad I read this. Coming in at number 2 is The Great Believers. I just really adored this book. It is a heartfelt, kind of sad book that follows one man living in the 80s. He is gay, and AIDS has started to erupt in the community, and he is dealing with the people around him who are judgmental, and then also his friend group who are contracting AIDS, and he's dealing with the loss of some of his friends and also dealing with the fear of getting AIDS himself and trying to avoid it at all costs. Now, he also works in the art world, and there's a lot about art in here, so much about art. But you're also dealing with the sister of one of his friends, the friend group, who does pass from contracting AIDS. And she is dealing with an issue in the present as well as dealing with the past as well. The issue in the present is that her daughter has suddenly decided to join a cult in France. And so she's like, absolutely not. I'm going to France to try to save my daughter. And it's about her trying to hunt down her daughter. And meanwhile, also dealing with the trauma of her past and losing her brother. And the two worlds kind of collide in this book in the most wonderful of ways. You are rooting for these men in this book in such a big way. I was terrified for all of them. I was angered by how society was just writing them off, like their lives didn't mean a thing. Now, my favorite book of the year is probably no surprise to you guys, and that is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. Wow, this is like a literary fiction thriller. It truly is. Jessica Knoll has written other things. I've only read one thing by her, which is Luckiest Girl Alive, which I enjoyed. This is next level. This is if Jessica Knoll can just keep doing this, it truly is like literary fiction. This really takes a good look at how we look at our victims in the world and how we look at our serial killers, and how we don't idolize the serial killers, but we put them as the focus and we forget the victims. This truly does explore this. We in this book are exploring the victims of Ted Bundy. He is not mentioned in this book, which I love, that you never hear the name Ted Bundy, because you don't have to. We all know the story. But it takes place in 1978, and we follow a woman named Pamela. She is kind of the president of the sorority house, and you follow her the night that Ted Bundy enters the sorority and injures many of her fellow sisters and kills one of her best friends in the world. So you follow her minute by minute in this night. And when I say that was tense, I am not joking. I was terrified reading it, to the point that I had nightmares and had to have the light on for a little bit because I was so scared. Like I woke up from the nightmare and was so scared I couldn't even go to the bathroom to go pee or anything. I was just like, I can't move. I couldn't move. I was so scared. So you follow that portion, but you also follow her afterwards. So she obviously survives this ordeal, and she's really not impressed with how the police are conducting this investigation. They're extremely rude to her. She is like about to become a lawyer. She has her timelines down perfectly. Like she would be the perfect witness, but because she's a woman, the police are very much willing to just dismiss her. And so she, of course, being the strong woman that she is, decides, absolutely not, I will not take this. And you really see a character arc in here of Pamela being dutiful and following the rules and being a good girl, and like really starting to question that. It's such a feminist book. It's so great. So she starts to question that. And meanwhile, she also meets a woman named Tina, who's on the other side of the country, and starts to learn about this case at the sorority house, and goes, that is the same man who killed my best friend, who has never been found. Her body has never been found. And so these two women meet and start to try to take Ted Bundy down themselves. And these women are just, they're cheerleaders for each other. They're cheerleaders for feminism. It is one of the most feminist thrillers I've ever read. And I'm so glad that I read it. Also terrifying because it's the case of Ted Bundy's killings. One more last thing that I really liked is that, especially with Pamela, I will say, that they take these victims and make them center stage. Instead of focusing on Ted, she says, here is my best friend and what she would have accomplished, and what she was going after in her life. And her life was cut short, and we'll never know what greatness she could have led her life to, acquired in her life because of this man. Why are we talking about how smart this man is because he like represented himself in court, when in reality he was like a dropout, and he was actually quite pitiful and just truly so egotistical? Why are we celebrating him when we could be celebrating these women that he killed, who had potential and could have changed the world for the better? Oh, it was so good. I just so highly recommend reading this. I'm kind of sad that not more people have talked about that. I mean, it was a big-ish thriller of the summer, but it should have been much more than that. I just adored it. And I do think it's much more literary fiction than thriller. It's definitely been marketed as a thriller because Jessica Knoll has written thrillers in the past, but it's just both, and I just adored it. Anyway, I'll stop talking about it. Oh wow, this is 40 minutes long. I hope that you have enjoyed my little lovely ramble about all the books that I read in 2023 and the very, very best of the best. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite book of 2023 was. And now we will merge into 2024, and start reading again. It's a wonderful year. It's going to be a good reading year. I hope that you have a great day. Bye, guys.